When the Biden administration first took office, many were in awe of how quickly the Biden administration was able to get an anti-Asian hate crime bill passed through Congress and signed into law while only being in office a little over 3 months. Now, what I'd like to take a quick moment to do is read this very short New York Times article titled, "The House Passes an Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill, Clearing It for Biden's Signature." And the reason I wanted to read this article off for you very quickly is because it wasn't too long ago when there were some arguments online concerning whether or not the hate crime bill was specifically for Asians. Well, I can assure you that this hate crime bill was created for the specific purposes of curtailing anti-Asian hate crimes in the United States, and this article proves that point to be true. So let's dive into it very quickly. The House passes an anti-Asian hate crimes bill, clearing it for Biden's signature. The House overwhelmingly passed legislation on Tuesday amid the strengthening federal efforts to address hate crimes directed at Asian Americans, clearing the measure for President Biden's signature. The bill, approved in a 364-62 vote, is the first legislative action that Congress has taken to bolster law enforcement's response to attacks on people of Asian descent amid an uptick in discrimination and violence against Asian Americans communities during the pandemic. The Asian American community is exhausted from being forced to endure this rise of bigotry and racist attacks, said Representative Grace Ming, Democrat of New York. Asian Americans are tired of living in fear. The measure, led by Ms. Ming and Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat of Hawaii, would establish a position at the Justice Department to expedite the agency's reviews of hate crimes and expand the channels to report them. It would also encourage the creation of state-run hate crime hotlines, providing grants to law enforcement agencies that train their officers to identify hate crimes and introduce a series of public education campaigns around bias against people of Asian descent. The bill was also approved by an overwhelming margin in the Senate, with only Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, opposing it. He argued that it mandated an overly expensive collection of data around hate crimes that could sideline into government overreach. In the House, 62 Republicans opposed it. Mr. Biden last month pledged to swiftly sign the legislation when it reached his desk, hailing it as putting our nation one step closer to achieving justice and equality. For more than a year, far too many Asian Americans have woken up each morning increasingly fearful for their safety and the safety of their loved ones, Mr. Biden said. They have been scapegoated, harassed, and assaulted. Some have even been killed. So that settles that. But if you thought 3.5 months was fast to put in place an anti-Asian hate crime bill, well, I'm here to tell you that Joe Biden has absolutely nothing on New York Governor Kathy Hochul, as New York governor signs anti-hate crime bill days after synagogue attack foiled. Days after 2 men were arrested in Penn Station and charged with planning an attack on a synagogue, New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed legislation meant to combat hate and bias crimes. The bills would require mandatory hate crime prevention training for individuals convicted of such crimes, as well as establish a statewide campaign around inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. Hochul's announcement comes after a weekend that included the arrest of 2 individuals who wanted to shoot up a synagogue and the shooting at an LGBTQ club in Colorado Springs, Colorado, that left 5 dead and 25 wounded. On Sunday, Hochul said state police would increase surveillance and protection efforts at synagogues and other vulnerable sites. Hochul pointed to an Anti-Defamation League report that showed that the organization counted 2,717 anti-Semitic incidents across the country last year, which was a 34% increase from the previous year and the highest since it began tracking in 1979. No young Jewish boy should ever have to look over their shoulder as he's walking to a yeshiva, Hochul said. Now, there's 2 things that I'd like to highlight, and the first one is this. When you come back to the portion of the article highlighted which states, Hochul pointed to an Anti-Defamation League report that showed that the organization counted 2,717 anti-Semitic incidences across the country last year, which was a 34% increase from the previous year and the highest since it began tracking in 1979. What I need you to understand is that these numbers are inflated, and I broke down the process of inflating hate crime numbers in my past video titled, NYC Mayor Eric Adams and Governor deliver $40 million to AAPI, but $0 $100 and a hip-hop lecture to the black community. Now let's develop a little understanding of how inflating numbers work. First, you have to understand that there is a difference between hate incidents and hate crimes. Notice how the ADL and other organizations such as Stop Asian Hate never cite the official FBI data on hate crimes. The reason they don't do that is because, as we all know, the actual FBI data on hate crimes shows and proves that Black Americans are the most hated and targeted race and or group of people in this country. According to the FBI data, no other race or group of people even comes close to being targeted as much as Black Americans. And these organizations know this. And that's why they rely on what's called hate incidents. Hate incidents are incidents that are reported to said organization like the ADL or Stop AAPI Hate versus being reported to the proper authorities. Also, hate incidents do not comprise solely of physical assault, but mainly verbal abuse or physical avoidance. As you can see here in the Stop AAPI Hate's National Report, from March 19, 2020 to December 31, 2021, a total of 10,905 hate incidents against Asian American and Pacific Island persons were reported to Stop AAPI Hate. Verbal harassment, 63%, continues to make up the biggest share of total incidents reported. Physical assault, 16%, comprises the second largest category of total reported incidents, followed by the deliberate avoidance of AAPI's 16.1%. So in between verbal harassment and deliberate avoidance, that accounts for 79.1% of hate incidents. 79.1% of these incidents consist of, I don't like how you're talking to me, and I don't like that you moved away from me. Now let's move over to the recent ADL report. In 2021, ADL counted a total of 2,717 anti-Semitic incidents across the U.S. This represents a 34% increase from the 2,026 incidents recorded in 2020 and is the highest number on record since ADL began tracking anti-Semitic incidents in 1979. The audit classifies incidents into three categories: assault, a total of 88 incidents; harassment, a total of 1,776 incidents were categorized as harassment. Now, this category labeled as harassment is the ADL's version of verbal harassment that we just saw in the Stop AAPI Hate report. Now, you see, verbal harassment can literally mean anything, okay? Verbal harassment can simply break down into, I don't like how you're talking to me, or I don't like what you just said, or I disagree with your perspective or observation. You see, verbal harassment doesn't automatically mean racial slur. Verbal harassment can literally mean anything that you simply just don't like. And then there's the last category, vandalism, with another 853 incidents. Now, if you've been paying attention, do you see how in both reports, over half of the hate incidents were verbal harassment? That is precisely how these numbers are inflated. Verbal harassment cannot be verified unless you actually have a witness or there is an audio recording. Outside of that, it's just one person making a claim that another person said something that they didn't like. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what was being said was a racial slur. It could literally be anything. And if you don't like or agree with what was just said, well, that's verbal harassment. Because I didn't agree with you on that, or because I don't like your observation. But regardless of whatever is being said, almost none of it can be verified. Yet these are the inflated numbers that other groups are using to receive millions of dollars from federal and local governments. These are the inflated numbers that other groups are using to secure hate crime bills that are specifically for them. Yet when actual acts of hate occur to Black Americans, as we witnessed not too long ago in Buffalo when white supremacist Peyton Gendron went into a Tops grocery store and intentionally targeted and killed killed 10 black Americans, the Democrats used your tragedies as an opportunity to push forth other political agendas, which brings my last point. Your tragedies are used as an opportunity to push anti-terrorism bills, gun control bills, and whatever other bills that the Democrats have that they've been wanting to push. Every time tragedy strikes the black community, the Democrats use it as an opportunity to put their intersectional magic on it by tying your tragedies into their own political agendas.
And you hear about them in Congress by certain people, and you hear about them on cable shows. It's not just buried in the web anywhere. So these hateful philosophies are starting to become mainstream, and they took hold in the mind of an 18-year-old who lives 3 hours from here. And he targeted this community, intentionally coming to this zip code because he could do maximum damage and death to people, not just any New Yorker, but he was targeting and wanted to execute black New Yorkers. That's hard to comprehend, the depth of that hate. And it wasn't that alone, though. You could have that hate in your heart, and you could sit in your house and ferment these evil thoughts, but you can't act on it unless you have a weapon. And that's the intersection of these two crises in our nation right now. The mainstreaming of the hate speech and the racism and everything else that brought that person to this point, but also the access to military-style weapons and magazines, and it is that lethal combination that resulted in the loss of 10 decent, good people. We pray for them, but they're not with us because of that combination.
Now, really think about this. No more than a couple of days after a foiled synagogue shooting was this hate crime bill passed in New York. But when 10 black Americans were racially targeted by a white supremacist and killed for no good reason other than being black, you were told that this isn't even about black people. It's about everybody. And they, meaning the Democrats, proceeded to act as such.
And I hope when the president goes today, and there's no one better with giving a real compassion and feeling to families than President Joe Biden. I was in the room when he met with George Floyd's family the day before we had the funeral services in Houston. He is very compassionate, and so is Dr. Joe Biden. And I think he meeting with first responders and community leaders is good, and then dealing with gun issue is good. But I also want him to come out and go from empathy to really dealing with this as a national hate crime level that is not just against blacks, but is against anyone that white supremacists feel are not like them, which includes Jews, Asians, Latino Americans, LGBTQ. The night this happened, when I was called by our people on the ground in National Action Network's chapter in Buffalo, I reached out to Jonathan Greenblatt. I reached out from the ADL. I reached out to the head of LULAC. Latinos. I reached out to Mark Morial and said, we need to call on a White House conference on hate crimes. We may all not agree on every issue, but we all are being targeted. And the president must raise it to that level to say we've got to deal with hate. We have to deal with those in the social media companies that allow this to have platforms. We have to deal with every element to break down how we stop this so that a young man at 18 years old could think, not only am I going to do it, plan it, drive 3 hours to do it, I'm going to live stream it because I want the world to know I'm a part of that.
Yet when tragedy strikes everybody else, they show up with their inflated numbers and receive all of the necessary funds and legislation that they need to ensure that these tragedies won't happen again. And with all that being said, that does it for today's video. So please make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell notification next to the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. All social media links will be pinned in the comment section below. And also, please make sure you text tdhiphop to number 33222. That's tdhiphop to number 33222. That way you'll get a text notification whenever I release a new video, but it also serves as an insurance plan for myself. So in case YouTube ever gives me the axe, I'll be able to send you a direct link to where you can find me next. And last but certainly not least, for those of you who have a love and appreciation for the work that I put in on this channel, the #1 way you can show your support is through Patreon. For only $3 a month, that will help put me in position to take TD Hip Hop Media media off of YouTube. Remember, the goal is not to grow big on YouTube, but to grow independent of YouTube. And for those of you who have issues with joining Patreon, you can also hit the join button that's next to the subscribe button, and that way you can become an official channel member for as little as $3 a month as well. And lastly, if you haven't already, please make sure you join the emailing list. There is no way that I can go independent of YouTube if I cannot take the audience with me. And a link to that will be pinned in the comment section as well. Thank you for your time, and until the next video, peace.